My Mills event planner called. Your in-laws booked a gala but demanded you be excluded. I smiled. Let them. She gasped. It's a $55,000 tab. Good. I own every vendor. I am 44 years old, and if there is one thing life has taught me, it is that betrayal rarely comes with a loud warning. Usually, it arrives quietly, slipping through the cracks of a normal Tuesday evening. I was sitting in my home office, the city lights of downtown Chicago glowing faintly through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The house was quiet. My husband, Harrison, was still at his architecture firm, or so I assumed. I was deep into reviewing quarterly financial reports when my phone buzzed on the mahogany desk. It was almost 9 o'clock. My assistant, Preston, rarely called this late unless something was critically wrong. I picked it up, pressing the phone to my ear. Before I could even say hello, Preston took a sharp, uneasy breath. His voice was laced with the kind of heavy hesitation that immediately makes your stomach drop. He told me he was so sorry to bother me at this hour, but he had caught something in the VIP booking logs that he felt I needed to see immediately. I leaned back in my leather chair, rubbing my temples, expecting to hear about a double-booked corporate event or a delayed shipment of truffles. I told him to go ahead, to just give it to me straight. He cleared his throat. He said that a reservation had just been finalized for the Grand Estate for a Saturday night, 3 weeks from now. The Grand Estate is our crown jewel, an aggressively exclusive historic mansion venue that usually commands an 8-month waiting list. I asked him what the problem was. Was the client a nightmare? Preston paused. He said the client was Constance Kensington. He waited a beat to let the name sink in. Constance Kensington is my mother-in-law's maiden name. She had paid a massive cash deposit to secure the date. But that wasn't the part that made Preston call me late at night. The red flag, he explained, was the note attached to the master file. Constance had been aggressively specific with the new junior event coordinator. She demanded absolute confidentiality. She strictly mandated that no promotional materials, no courtesy emails, and absolutely no phone calls regarding this event were to be routed to my personal or business accounts. In her exact words, as Preston read them back to me, under no circumstances is Valerie to be informed of this gathering. This is a private family affair, and she is explicitly excluded. I gripped my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The silence stretched between Preston and me. I stared straight ahead at a framed photograph sitting on the corner of my desk. It was a picture of Harrison and me, taken 12 years ago. We looked so young, standing in front of the rundown, brick-and-mortar sandwich shop I had just poured my entire life savings into. I remembered the hope I felt that day. Now, looking at that same man's mother deliberately plotting to lock me out of my own family, the hope felt like a sick joke. Constance had bypassed the massive waitlist by casually mentioning to a junior coordinator that she was family of the ownership, leveraging my name to get her foot in the door, while simultaneously placing a gag order on the staff to keep me in the dark. It was a staggering display of audacity. She was using my status, my venue, and my staff to host a celebration that I was specifically banned from attending. I let out a low, breathy laugh that had absolutely no humor in it. Preston asked if I was all right. I told him I was fine, just processing the sheer nerve of it all. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even shouting. After 22 years of dealing with Constance, the shock had worn off long ago. What replaced it in that moment was something entirely different. It was a cold, quiet, and terrifyingly clear sense of absolute clarity. The game was finally over. To understand the profound irony of Constance's little scheme, you have to understand the reality of my life, a reality that my husband's family has spent 2 decades completely ignoring. 12 years ago, when that photo on my desk was taken, I was exhausted, terrified, and risking everything. My grandmother had passed away and left me a modest inheritance. While most people would have put it into a mutual fund or a down payment on a house in the suburbs, I bought a failing sandwich shop in a decent neighborhood. I worked 14-hour days. I scrubbed the grease off the floors myself. I negotiated with vendors until my voice went hoarse. Through sheer willpower, countless sleepless nights, and a terrifying amount of risk, that single sandwich shop evolved. It grew into a bistro and then a fine dining establishment. Today, I am the sole owner and CEO of the Valerie Hospitality Group. We own and operate 6 of the most profitable, high-end restaurants in the greater Chicago area. We run 2 elite catering companies that handle corporate galas and celebrity weddings. And, of course, we own the Grand Estate, the breathtaking converted mansion that Constance had just booked. The estate features imported crystal chandeliers, a private sommelier, and menus crafted by chefs I personally recruited from Michelin-starred kitchens in New York and Paris. It is a multi-million-dollar empire built entirely on my own sweat and intuition. But if you asked my mother-in-law, Constance, or my father-in-law, Winston, what I do for a living, you would get a very different story. To them, I am just Harrison's quiet, plain wife who works in the food service industry. They have never bothered to ask for details. They have never visited my corporate offices. They have never attended a single restaurant grand opening, despite me mailing them engraved, foil-stamped invitations every single time. They view my career as a cute, slightly embarrassing little hobby that keeps me busy while their son does the real work at his architectural firm. They are incredibly proud people, the kind of old-school suburban snobs who measure a person's worth by their pedigree. Winston inherited a chain of mid-level dry-cleaning businesses from his father. It's a respectable living, certainly, but they carry themselves as if they are industrial tycoons. They believe their dry-cleaning chain is a historic dynasty. Because of this, they look down on me. My parents were immigrants who ran one single, cramped, steam-filled dry-cleaning shop in a working-class neighborhood. To Constance, the fact that my parents worked the counter themselves made them laborers, while Winston sitting in a small back office made him a CEO. For 22 years, they have treated me like a peasant who somehow tricked their prince into marriage. Harrison knows I am successful, but even he doesn't truly grasp the magnitude of it. He knows I own restaurants, plural, but he has never looked at a balance sheet. He never asks about my profit margins. He prefers to live in his comfortable bubble, designing local office buildings, assuming I just manage a few nice cafes. So, when Constance walked into the Grand Estate, looked around at the vaulted ceilings and the velvet drapes, she truly had no clue that the deed to the entire property was sitting in a safe under my name. She just thought it was a pretty place to throw a party, and she assumed her daughter-in-law might know someone who could bump her up the waiting list. It was ignorant, arrogant, and almost pitiful. Preston's voice broke through my thoughts, pulling me back to the reality of the phone call. He was nervously waiting for my command. He asked me if I wanted him to cancel the reservation. He offered to call Constance himself, to tell her there had been a terrible administrative error and the venue was actually double-booked. He even offered to blacklist her name from all our properties. It would have been so easy. I could have shut it down right then and there. I could have ruined her plans with a single stroke of a keyboard and let her scramble to find a cheap hotel ballroom with only 3 weeks' notice. But as I sat there, tracing the edge of my mahogany desk, a different idea began to take root in my mind. Canceling the party would be a private victory. It would just lead to another endless, gaslighting argument where Constance would play the victim and Harrison would beg me to apologize for being vindictive. No. Private conversations and behind-the-scenes boundaries hadn't worked for 22 years. I told Preston not to cancel anything. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. I instructed him to let the reservation proceed exactly as Constance wanted. I told him to call Stella, the general manager of the Grand Estate, and loop her in. I wanted them to assign our absolute best staff to her event. I wanted them to grant every single extravagant request she made. If she wanted the imported white truffles, she gets them. If she wanted the reserve vintage champagne, pop the corks. If she wanted to hire our premium event planning division to handle the floral arrangements and the string quartet, they were to say yes to everything. Preston was incredibly confused. He reminded me that it was already a $55,000 tab, and with upgrades, it would only climb higher. I smiled into the dark room. I told him that was exactly the point. I wanted the bill to be astronomical. But I had one strict condition for Preston and Stella: they were to keep me informed of every single detail. I wanted daily updates on the menu changes, the guest list, the seating charts, and the schedule of events for the evening. And above all else, no one on the staff was to breathe a single word to the Kensington family about who actually owned the Valerie Hospitality Group. Preston finally caught on. I could hear the slight shift in his tone, a mix of deep professional respect and mild terror. He simply said, "Understood, Valerie. We will execute it flawlessly." After I hung up the phone, the silence of the house felt different. It wasn't lonely anymore, it was charged. For 2 decades, I had bitten my tongue to keep the peace. I had swallowed insults, smiled through deliberate exclusions, and made myself smaller so that Harrison's family could feel big. Constance wanted to use the empire I built to host a grand gala to celebrate her own legacy, while forcing me to sit at home like an unwanted dog. I decided right then that I would give her exactly what she asked for. I would let her build her perfect $55,000 glass house. And then I was going to walk right through the front door and shatter it. To truly grasp the weight of what I was about to do, you have to understand where the resentment started. It wasn't born overnight. It was forged over 22 grueling years. It started way back when Harrison and I were just 22 years old, finishing our senior year at UCLA. I was a fiercely driven business major, constantly stressed about student loans. Harrison was studying architecture, breezing through life with the relaxed confidence of a boy who always knew his parents' safety net was there to catch him. We fell in love over cheap campus coffee and late-night study sessions. He was charming, gentle, and he looked at me like I was the only person in the room. But then came the inevitable trip back to Chicago to meet his family. I will never forget that first dinner at the Kensington house. Their home in Lake Forest was massive, with perfectly manicured lawns and a driveway circular enough to park 6 cars. I wore my best dress, a simple, navy blue shift dress I had bought on clearance, and brought an expensive bottle of wine I couldn't really afford. Constance opened the door, and the very first thing she did was look me up and down, her eyes stalling on my scuffed, sensible heels. Her smile was tight, practically frozen in place, like she was greeting a door-to-door salesperson. During dinner, the interrogation began. Constance didn't ask about my studies or my dreams. She asked about my pedigree. She wanted to know where my family summered, what clubs we belonged to, and what my father did for a living. When I proudly told her that my parents had immigrated to this country with nothing and built a successful dry cleaning business in a working-class neighborhood, the temperature in the dining room plummeted. Winston, Harrison's father, let out a condescending little chuckle and muttered something about how charming it was that my family was in the garment care trade, too, albeit on a much smaller, sweatshop scale. Constance's face contorted into a mask of polite horror. She had spent her entire life grooming Harrison to marry a girl from their country club circle, someone whose family owned vacation homes in the Hamptons and sat on charity boards. Instead, he had brought home the daughter of a blue-collar dry cleaner. The hypocrisy was astounding to me. The Kensington wealth was built on the exact same industry. But because Winston managed a chain of stores from an air-conditioned office while my father physically steamed the shirts himself, they viewed me as an entirely different, inferior species. From that very first night, Constance made it her life's mission to remind me that my bloodline was a disappointment. She spoke to me slowly, as if I lacked the education to understand complex topics. That night, riding the train back to the city, I cried. Harrison held my hand and told me his mother was just protective, that she would warm up to me once she realized how amazing I was. I believed him. That was my first mistake. Harrison and I got married right after graduation. We had a small, modest wedding because my parents couldn't afford much, and the Kensingtons completely refused to contribute a single dime to an event they didn't approve of. The first 10 years of our marriage were a masterclass in psychological endurance. Long before I had the money, the restaurants, or the power, I had to survive the 1,000 paper cuts of Constance Kensington's subtle, relentless cruelty. It was never overt screaming matches. It was always systemic, polite erasure. When family photos were taken at Christmas, Constance would physically maneuver me to the very edge of the group, ensuring that when the photos were framed, I was often cropped out entirely, leaving just Harrison smiling next to his sister, Bianca. When we attended family weddings, Harrison would be seated at the main family table, while I was conveniently placed at the overflow table near the kitchen doors, seated next to distant cousins and misbehaving toddlers. When I finally managed to scrape together enough money to open my very first cafe, I was so proud. I thought, finally, I have achieved something that will earn their respect. During a Sunday brunch, Harrison proudly announced to his parents that my little cafe had just received a glowing review from a major food critic. Constance didn't even blink. She slowly took a sip of her mimosa, turned entirely away from me, and loudly asked Bianca how her minor residential real estate exams were going. It was as if I hadn't spoken at all. My achievements were treated as awkward interruptions. I endured this because I loved my husband. But what slowly began to kill my spirit wasn't just Constance's behavior, it was Harrison's profound cowardice. Every single time she insulted my clothes, ignored my career, or deliberately mispronounced my mother's name, I would look to Harrison to defend me. And every time, he would suddenly find his shoes incredibly interesting. On the car ride home, he would recycle the same tired excuses. She's just traditional, Valerie. You know how she gets. Please don't make a big deal out of it, just let it go for my sake. I let it go so many times that I started to forget what it felt like to hold my ground. I poured all of my anger, all of my frustration, and all of my bruised pride into my business. I worked until my hands bled because I desperately wanted to build an armor made of success, an armor so thick that Constance's paper cuts couldn't reach me anymore. The subtle disrespect eventually escalated into blatant, humiliating exclusions as my business grew and my time became more consumed by my work. They realized they didn't even have to pretend to include me anymore. There were 3 specific events over the last few years that finally broke whatever fragile bond one had been trying to maintain with my in-laws. The first was Thanksgiving, 3 years ago. Harrison was out of town on a business trip, so I baked a massive pecan pie from scratch and drove 45 minutes through a brutal Chicago snowstorm to the Kensington house. When I pulled up, the driveway was empty. The house was completely dark. I stood on the porch, freezing, holding a pie, and called Constance. She answered breezily, saying, "Oh, didn't Harrison tell you?" We decided the house was too drafty, so we moved the dinner to Bianca's place. Bianca lived an hour in the opposite direction. No one had told me. I drove home alone in the snow, threw the pie in the trash, and drank a bottle of wine by myself. The second was the grand family vacation to Hawaii. Constance had spent months talking about how wonderful it would be to have the whole family together in Maui. When it came time to book the flights, Harrison casually mentioned he was packing his bags. I asked what flight we were on. He wouldn't look at me. He mumbled that his mother had booked a villa, but there was a mix-up with the room count. There simply weren't enough rooms for everyone, so he was just going to go alone to keep the peace. I watched my husband fly to a tropical island with the family that hated me, leaving me behind without a fight. But the final, unforgivable blow happened last year. It was Harrison's 40th birthday. A massive milestone. I had spent weeks planning a surprise dinner for him. 2 days before my planned dinner, I found out through an Instagram post from Bianca that Constance had thrown Harrison a massive, catered surprise party at a country club. Harrison was in the center of the photos, laughing, surrounded by his parents, his sister, and old college friends. His wife of over 2 decades was not invited. When I confronted him that night, he broke down. He said his mother told him I was probably too busy with my little food projects to attend, and he didn't want to cause a scene by demanding I be there. That was the day a part of my marriage officially died. The man I loved was too terrified of his mother's disapproval to demand respect for his own wife. So, when Preston told me about the $55,000 gala at my venue, I didn't feel sad. I felt a dangerous, simmering rage. Thank you for watching this far. If you feel outraged on Valerie's behalf and are curious about what she'll do next, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the best part. And don't forget to leave a comment letting me know the name of the city you live in. Every comment helps the video reach more people. Thank you so much. Harrison walked through the front door around 7:30 that evening, looking every bit the exhausted architect. He dropped his leather briefcase by the door, loosened his silk tie, and headed straight for the kitchen, probably expecting a quiet dinner and a glass of scotch. I was already there, sitting on a high stool at the marble kitchen island. My laptop was open, but I wasn't working. I was waiting. I watched him move with a familiarity that used to bring me comfort, but tonight, it just made my chest feel tight. He asked me what was for dinner without even looking up. I didn't answer. Instead, I let the silence hang in the air until he finally stopped mid-stride and looked at me. I told him, very calmly, that his mother had booked the grand estate for her 50th anniversary party this coming Saturday. Harrison froze. He didn't look surprised that the party was happening. He looked surprised that I knew about it. He set his car keys down on the counter with a soft clatter and avoided my eyes, claiming he knew she was planning something but didn't realize she had picked a venue already. I didn't let him off the hook. I asked him point-blank if he knew that I was specifically not invited to this celebration. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of a 22-year marriage cracking under the weight of a husband's silence. Harrison finally sighed, leaning against the refrigerator, and muttered that it was complicated. He told me I knew how his mother was, and that she thought it might be better if it was just immediate family this time around. He actually had the nerve to say she wanted less drama. I repeated the word back to him, flat and cold. I asked him what drama I had ever caused in over 2 decades of being part of this family. He couldn't give me a single example. Instead, he threw me under the bus, saying Constance felt like there was tension whenever I was around. He said she wanted this anniversary to be special, and she thought everyone would be more relaxed if they kept it intimate. I stared at the man I had built a life with, the father of my 2 children. He couldn't even meet my gaze as he defended the woman who was actively humiliating his wife. He was prioritizing his mother's comfort over my basic dignity. I asked him if he really knew she was booking a party at a restaurant I owned, excluding me, and said absolutely nothing to stop her. His head snapped up, and for the first time that night, he looked genuinely confused. He asked me what I meant by my restaurant. I looked at Harrison and realized that his ignorance was almost as painful as his mother's malice. I told him clearly, I own the grand estate. I own all 6 of the restaurants under my hospitality group. I told him I even own the catering company his mother was likely using for the event. I pointed out the staggering irony that Constance was literally spending tens of thousands of dollars at my business to celebrate an occasion that I was banned from. Harrison's face went pale, a sickly shade of white that told me the reality was finally sinking in. In 22 years, my husband had never fully grasped the scope of what I had built. He knew I was successful in a vague, abstract way, but he had never asked for the details. He never visited my corporate headquarters, never looked at the financial statements I sometimes left on my desk, and never bothered to understand the sheer scale of my operations. To him, I was just Valerie who works in food. He stammered that he didn't know the estate was mine, and he was sure Constance didn't know either. He tried to excuse her by saying she probably just picked it because it's the nicest venue in Chicago. I asked him whose fault that was. I reminded him that I had invited his family to every single opening, every milestone, and every award ceremony for 20 years. Constance had never attended a single one. She had never once asked what I did or shown even a flicker of interest in my career. She didn't know because she never cared enough to find out. Harrison ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he only made when he was backed into a corner. He told me it was awkward, but said we could fix it. His solution was the final insult. He suggested that he would talk to his mother and see if I could just come as his +1. He said we didn't have to make it a big thing about who owns what. I let out a disbelieving laugh. A +1? At my own restaurant. I asked him if he even heard himself. He got defensive, asking what I wanted him to do. What I wanted was for my husband to stand up for me just once. I wanted him to tell his mother that excluding his wife of 22 years was unacceptable. I wanted to matter. I told him to tell his mother the party was off unless I was properly invited, not as a guest, but as a member of the family. Harrison shook his head and said he couldn't do that. He said it was their 50-year anniversary and he couldn't ruin it over this. He actually asked me if I could just let this one go for him. I looked at him and told him that after 22 years of biting my tongue, I was officially done. The next morning, I drove to the Grand Estate with a cold, iron resolve. I met with my general manager, Stella, in her office. Stella was mortified when I explained the situation. She apologized profusely, explaining that if she had known the reservation was made under false pretenses, she never would have approved it. She told me the new junior coordinator had no idea about the family connection and just processed the request because it was a high-value cash booking. I told her it wasn't her fault, but I needed her to do something very specific for me. I told her to let the reservation stand. I wanted the party to proceed exactly as planned. But I also wanted to be informed of every single detail, every vendor, every special request, and every change to the menu. Stella looked confused but agreed. Over the next few days, I watched the preparations unfold with a detached, clinical fascination. Constance was sparing no expense for this celebration. She ordered our most expensive wines, requested custom floral arrangements that cost thousands, and hired a string quartet for the evening. She upgraded the menu twice, adding lobster and premium beef. She even ordered a 5-tier anniversary cake from our lead pastry chef, whom I had personally recruited from a famous kitchen in New York. The total bill was climbing toward $55,000. Constance didn't seem concerned about the cost. I suspect she assumed the family connection would eventually get her a massive discount, or perhaps she planned to stick Harrison with the bill. Either way, she was in for a rude awakening. Through Stella's inquiry, I also discovered the secret purpose of the evening. It wasn't just a dinner. Constance and Winston were planning to announce their retirement and transfer ownership of their dry cleaning chain to Harrison and his sister, Bianca. The irony was not lost on me. For decades, they had looked down on my parents for running a single dry cleaning shop. Meanwhile, I had transformed a small inheritance into a hospitality empire worth 50 times what the Kensington family business was worth. But to Constance, her husband's dry cleaning chain was a legacy worth celebrating, while my achievements remained invisible. On Thursday evening, Harrison came home with a guilty expression. He told me his mother had asked him to give a speech about the family business. I asked him if he was going to do it, and he said yes, because it was a big moment for all of them. I corrected him, reminding him that I wasn't part of all of them. He sighed and said his mother told him it would just be uncomfortable if I came. He had accepted her decision without a fight. I just nodded slowly. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just told him to enjoy the party. Saturday arrived with a crisp autumn chill. I spent the morning reviewing every logistical detail of the evening with Stella. At 2 o'clock, I gathered the entire staff in the private dining room for a briefing. I stood at the front and looked at the faces of my employees, the team I had nurtured over the last 12 years. I told them that tonight, we were hosting a 50-year anniversary party for Constance and Winston Kensington. I informed them that these people were my in-laws and that I was the owner of this establishment. Murmurs rippled through the room. Many of them had worked for me for years, but had never seen my in-laws at any company function. I told them clearly that the hosts of tonight's party were not aware of my ownership and that they had chosen to deliberately exclude me from this family celebration. I instructed them to provide excellent service, just as they would for any guest, but I also told them to be prepared because I would be attending this evening and there would be some surprises. Stella stepped forward and asked what I needed from them. I told them to just do their jobs beautifully. The Kensington family began arriving at 6. I watched them from my second-floor office, which overlooked the main dining hall through a two-way mirror I had installed for quality control. Constance looked radiant in a silk champagne-colored dress. Winston wore a tailored suit and a nervous smile. Harrison arrived with our children, Penelope and Wyatt, who were home from college for the weekend. They had texted me earlier asking why I wasn't coming, and I told them I would explain everything later. Bianca came with her husband and kids, followed by the extended family, aunts, uncles, and cousins I had shared holidays with for 2 decades. None of them seemed to notice my absence, or if they did, none of them bothered to ask. By 7, all 50 guests were seated. The string quartet played softly as servers glided between tables with bottles of wine that cost more than most people's car payments. Constance sat at the head table like a queen surveying her domain, completely unaware that the domain actually belonged to the woman she had spent 22 years trying to erase. I waited until the first course was served. I watched her laugh, saw her sip the wine I had selected for my cellar months ago, and felt a cold, sharp sense of timing take over. It was time. I had chosen my outfit with extreme care. It was a deep burgundy dress that commanded the room, paired with heels that clicked sharply against the polished hardwood floors. My hair was perfectly styled, my makeup was flawless, and I walked into that dining room with the air of someone who owned the place, because I did. Heads turned immediately as I approached the head table. Constance's smile froze so quickly it looked painful. Harrison looked like he might choke on his soup, and Bianca's eyes went wide with shock. I greeted everyone calmly, saying I hoped I wasn't interrupting. Constance recovered first, her social training kicking in. She called my presence a surprise and said she wasn't expecting me. I told her I knew she wasn't, but I thought it would be rude not to attend a family party being held at my own restaurant. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Even the string quartet stopped playing. Harrison leaned forward, his voice a frantic whisper, asking me what I was doing. I told him I was joining the family celebration and asked if that wasn't what families were supposed to do. Constance's expression hardened into a mask of pure ice. She said she didn't understand what I meant by my own restaurant and reminded me that this was the Grand Estate, one of the most exclusive venues in Chicago. I told her she was right, it is exclusive and it is mine. I proceeded to list my holdings for the entire room to hear. I own this venue. The Silver Maple, the Red Maple, the Maple Table, and several other top-tier establishments. I told her I own the catering company preparing her dinner and the event coordination service that hired the quartet playing in the corner. I looked her directly in the eye and told her that everything she saw around her, everything they were eating and drinking, came from businesses that I had built from the ground up. The color drained from her face as guests began to whisper and exchange bewildered looks. My children, Penelope and Wyatt, were staring at me with a mixture of shock and something that looked very much like awe. Winston finally spoke up, his voice hesitant, claiming they had no idea. I told him they didn't know because they had never cared enough to ask. In 22 years, neither of them had shown the slightest interest in my life or my success. To them, I had always been just the girl from the wrong side of town who wasn't good enough for their son. Constance tried to go on the offensive, straightening her spine and claiming that this was a family matter concerning their legacy. She had the audacity to say that their business announcements had nothing to do with me. I agreed with her. Their small chain of dry cleaners had nothing to do with my hospitality empire. But I pointed out that it did concern me when my husband's family used my name and my business to host a celebration while deliberately keeping me away. I turned to Harrison, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. I asked him if he knew that his mother had used my name to secure this reservation. I revealed that she had told my staff she was family of the owners to bypass the wait list for a party she didn't invite me to. Harrison weakly claimed he didn't know that part. I told him there was a lot he didn't know, like the fact that my company was worth more than his parents' entire estate, or that the inheritance he was so excited about was pocket change compared to what I earn in a single quarter. Most importantly, I told him that standing up for his wife should have mattered more to him than keeping his mother comfortable. Constance rose from her seat, shouting that I was making a scene and that this drama was exactly why they hadn't invited me. I laughed and told her she hadn't even seen drama yet. I caught Stella's eye and she nodded. I told Constance that I had debated what to do when I found out about her secret party. I could have canceled the reservation or refused service, leaving her to scramble for a venue with 4 days' notice. But I realized that would be petty and would only hurt my hardworking staff. I addressed the entire room, raising my voice so every cousin and aunt could hear me. I told them that for 22 years, I had been part of this family. I had shown up to every holiday, sent every gift, and supported my husband while raising 2 wonderful children who were now watching their grandmother exclude their mother. Penelope and Wyatt both looked stricken, and I saw Penelope wipe a tear from her eye. I told them that everything I had earned through my own effort, unlike the legacy they were so proud of. And tonight, they were all enjoying the fruits of my labor while trying to pretend I didn't exist. Winston stood up shakily and pleaded with me, saying they didn't mean to hurt me and just thought it would be simpler this way. I asked him what was simpler than treating people with basic respect and not using your daughter-in-law's name to access her business while keeping her away. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the folded bill. I set it on the table directly in front of Constance. I told her the total was $55,000, covering the custom menu, the premium wines, and the exclusive booking fee for a short-notice reservation. Constance's jaw dropped as she looked at the number. She called it outrageous. I told her that was what excellence costs, and since I wasn't invited to the party, I saw no reason to offer the family discount she was clearly expecting. I told her the full amount was due tonight. She stammered that they didn't have that kind of cash on hand. I told her she had better figure it out, as my business operates on payment at the time of service for private events. I warned her that if she couldn't pay, I would consider it a breach of contract. Harrison stood up and told me I was going too far and that I couldn't do this to his parents. I looked at him and said they had done this to themselves. They had booked a venue they couldn't afford for a party that excluded half of Harrison's nuclear family. I told Constance happy anniversary and turned to walk toward the door. Before I could reach it, Penelope's voice stopped me. My daughter stood up, followed by Wyatt. They walked across the dining room to stand beside me. Penelope told the room she wasn't staying at a party her mother wasn't invited to, and Wyatt agreed, telling his grandmother that what she did was messed up. Constance looked like she might faint as her grandchildren publicly chose their mother over her. Harrison sat frozen, torn between his children and his parents. I put my arms around Penelope and Wyatt and thanked them, but told them they should stay for their grandparents' anniversary. Penelope looked at me and said they were leaving with me. And we did. The three of us walked out of the grand estate together, leaving 50 stunned guests and a $55,000 bill in our wake. In the car on the way home, Wyatt admitted he had no idea I owned all those restaurants, and I told him it was because they were usually too busy with their own lives to pay much attention to my work details. Penelope told me that what I did was incredible and necessary. I told them I was done trying to earn a place in a family that was never going to give me one. When they asked about their father, I told them that was something he and I had to figure out. Harrison didn't come home until midnight. I was still in my burgundy dress, sitting in the living room, when he walked through the door. He told me flatly that they had paid the bill. Constance had to call Bianca, and they split it between them. He said they were furious and wanted me to apologize. I told him that wasn't going to happen. Harrison sat down heavily and asked why I had to make such a public spectacle. I told him it was because private conversations hadn't worked for 22 years. I had talked to him countless times about how his family treated me, and nothing ever changed. He called it humiliation, but I called it showing them reality. I told him I was invisible to his family and had been since the day we married. Finally, Harrison told me his mother had asked him to choose. She said she couldn't be in the same room as me ever again. When I asked him what he said, he muttered that he needed time to think. I looked at my husband and realized I wasn't afraid of his answer anymore. I was just tired. I told him to take all the time he needed, but while he was thinking, I wanted him to think about the 22 years I had loved him through every slight and insult while he chose them over me. I told him I wasn't asking him to choose his mother. I was asking him to choose who he wanted to be. 2 weeks later, I moved out and went to my downtown condo. Harrison didn't call for a month. During that time, I opened negotiations for a 7th restaurant and kept myself busy so I wouldn't have to think about the fact that my husband still hadn't chosen me. Penelope and Wyatt visited me regularly, both angry at their father for not fighting harder. They told me Constance was bad-mouthing me to everyone, but the $55,000 bill had nearly wiped out her and Bianca's savings. Finally, on a rainy Tuesday, Harrison showed up at my condo. He looked thinner and had dark circles under his eyes. He told me he had told his mother he couldn't see her for a while. He had finally told her that what she did was wrong, not just the party, but 22 years of wrong. He said he had been complicit and realized that if he wanted to save our marriage, he had to stop making excuses for her. He told me that when he made his choice, his mother told him he wasn't her son anymore. He said he had already made his choice 22 years ago when he married me, and he was sorry it took him so long to act like it. 6 months later, we held the soft opening for my newest restaurant, the Golden Maple. My parents were there, beaming with pride, and Harrison stood beside me, his hand in mine. I gave a toast, saying that success is wonderful, but the most important thing is being surrounded by people who see you clearly and value you completely. In the corner, I saw Constance. She had asked to come, and I had allowed it, though she had to come to me to apologize. Her apology was stiff and rehearsed, but she admitted she was wrong and that I had built something remarkable. I told her I didn't know if I could forgive her, but I was willing to try to move forward for the sake of the family. Standing there, surrounded by people who loved me, I realized the real victory wasn't the money or the revenge. It was finally knowing my own worth and never letting anyone make me forget it again. Was I wrong to let her bear a $55,000 bill before revealing the truth? Or should I have been more forgiving knowing she lost a large portion of her retirement savings? Thank you for watching the story. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to the channel to support stories about inner strength and justice. See you in the next videos.